everyone. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Steph.
And together we are
PD Connect. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Helen. I'll read her bio and then she's going to take the floor. All right, here we go. For over 30 years, Helen Medsger was a primary caregiver and healthcare advocate for 2 generations of her family who lived with an atypical Parkinson's disorder. In addition to being a caregiver peer mentor and support group facilitator based in Santa Rosa, she's a support services volunteer for the Lewy Body Dementia Association, a member of advisory councils at UCSF Memory and Aging Center, the Global Brain Health Institute, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, making recommendations to the HHS Secretary in Congress on research, care, and long-term support services, and a speaker for various organizations on the topic of caregiving and caregiver self-care. That's a lot. That's amazing.
Is a lot. The credentials are,
Yes, very, very well done. Helen is committed to improving the lives of people with Parkinson's-related disorders and their care partners, and is a staunch advocate for an active participant in neurodegenerative disease and genetic research. Thank you so much, Helen, for joining us here today. And you get to take the floor.
Make you the spotlight.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Obviously, I'm Helen Medsger. And first, I want to thank Lisa and Jen and all the staff of PD Connect for offering me this opportunity to just kind of share with you, what I've learned over the years and how to take the challenges of caregiving and even living with the disease and turning them into gifts. Not only will I share my experiences and perspectives, but I'm going to share those of other caregivers who I've had the honor to work with over the years. So I'm going to share my screen. Just give me a moment here, and we will get here, and we'll take off. So obviously, this is my opening screen. Let's get rid. Okay, there it goes. And I'm going to move on to this slide. And let's see, I think I will minimize that so you can see a little bit more of it. So obviously I've been, my bio has been read. So all of these titles down here on the left-hand side, I'm not going to worry about, describing to you. I've become an advocate over the last several years, and it's encompassed a lot of roles. But to be honest, those are formal titles, and that isn't what truly matters to me. It's just a part of me. What matters to me is the circle on the right-hand side of the screen. These are the hats that I've worn. They represent the roles that I've taken on when it comes to, working with individuals, working with my family members and others. So, and it's been, now that I think about it, it has been 35 years that I've been supporting and caring for those who have Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia in my family. These hats represent those roles that are most important. I'm a caregiver and I'm a care partner. And there is a unique difference between those two roles, and I'll explain that in a few minutes. I'm a health advocate representing my loved ones' interests, when we're in a medical setting. I'm a dementia advocate on U.S. government panels when we're discussing and developing recommendations on research, clinical care, and long-term support services. I am a support group facilitator for caregivers of those with Lewy body dementia, and I am a trained peer mentor when working with them. And I've also been a research participant personally and 2 generations of my family in studies involving genetics, caregiving, Parkinson's disease, and healthy brain aging. But I'd like to just take a moment to kind of explain to you, how did I get here? Your life just doesn't turn this direction without some guidance. So I got here, the lessons that I've learned, with my sister and that I was able to implement, those didn't come out of nowhere. It came through years of dealing with my parents and their cares. And it actually started when I was a child. I was 11 years old and it began when my mother had a ruptured cerebral aneurysm. Now, the deficits she suffered, I will not detail for you today, but she went on to go through a lot. And then the symptoms that we had to contend with, we ended up contending with for the remainder of her life. And she didn't pass away until the age of 81 years of age. Then you'll see that I have 3 first-degree relatives, my father, my sister, and my youngest brother, who have succumbed to Parkinson's disease with Lewy body dementia. And my sister and my brother were young. Their first symptoms were unbeknownst to us, but cropped up when they were in their 30s. Their obvious symptoms, my sister was in her early 50s, my brother in his late 40s. So I was the primary caregiver, and I provided years of hands-on care for my parents. But I was my sister's care partner. And, the difference was during the time that my mother and father's care, there wasn't much known about treatments, and little to nothing was available in the way of supportive services, either for the individual or for us as a family. Now, and my father sadly had no insight into his symptoms. And we just were always just playing catch up, scrambling to understand what little information there was, and less than his physicians didn't have information as to what was going on with him. In fact, they didn't even have a name for my father's disease, which is Lewy body dementia, until the year he passed away. That was when finally the first diagnostic criteria for the disease was published and adopted in the medical community. But today is not going to be about my years of kind of creative, reactive crisis management that I went through, but I want to talk about the successes in the journey, especially during the 13 years of literally partnering with my sister. So I'm going to get us started here. So, this is just a graphic of a woman running on a hillside. I truly do think of supporting someone with any chronic disease or condition as a journey, one that's not going to be a sprint. It's not going to be a short-term thing in most cases, but a marathon that is being run over some of the most challenging terrain through sometimes threatening clouds and storms. But you know what? I've had to learn that I can put one foot in front of the other, and I can find days when the sun comes out. You just need to prepare yourself. You need to study that terrain. You need to dig deep to find the strength to overcome the obstacles. And what's important is you need not to hesitate to ask for help along the way and to learn new strategies. Then you watch for the break in those clouds when the sun shines bright, just like our fog finally dissipated today. And on those days, you take a deep breath in and you treasure those moments. So each of us need to kind of start from a place where we understand that it's okay to take a hand up and seek support. It's not a sign of weakness, but it's truly just an acknowledgement that many hands make for lighter work, right? As long as you have the right tools to begin with. So, how did I learn to contend with all that life has kind of dished out? Well, to begin with, whenever I kind of stepped into the role of a caregiver, I have to admit, there was an initial period of shock and there were fears. As a child, I had no understanding of all the changes that were going on in my family. I was just reactive. And I was really attempting, in some cases, to keep my younger siblings safe because my mother, sadly, had violent behaviors for some time. And so, I tried not to panic as an adult. I grew up, you learn how to cope. So I tried not to panic, but I certainly grieved, the possible losses that were going to be presented to me. And it meant nights and months of getting poor quality sleep with questions constantly waking me up, popping into my head. What's their prognosis? How is this going to How is this going to impact my family? How long am I going to be in this for? What about my career and my financial future? What about my parents or my sister's financial future? Is there enough money to be able to support their long-term care needs? Do I have to give up my job? Well, unfortunately, I did have to do that on 2 separate occasions. With my father, for over 2 years, I was unemployed. And with my sister, I ended up having to take an early retirement. But, most importantly, then I really had to contend with that anticipatory grief, that grief that said, what is going to happen when I lose them? How am I going to cope with that loss? So I decided, I had to acknowledge that this truly was happening, right? This wasn't a joke. I wasn't going to wake up some morning and all of a sudden it would all be gone.
Oh dear.
It's truly life with all its twists and turns. So as the saying goes, it's kind of a joke, but it really was true. I had to put my big girl panties on and I decided that I had to embrace it. So I grieved. Honestly, I did in many, many ways. But I got through that period of grief and just kind of ended up asking myself, how am I going to cope? Then I acknowledged that change is inevitable in life. So I learned to live in the present while preparing for the future. And then I embraced the situation. Wait a minute, I can do this. But then the question kind of became how. So we are going to talk about that how, those initial steps that are necessary to really set the stage to help you get through the day-to-day, month-to-month, and year-to-year of being able to support someone or even live with a long-term illness like Parkinson's disease. So we move on. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to start by saying that one of the most important gifts that we all need to discover early on in our journey is you have to learn to set boundaries. And I'm starting off with this one because setting boundaries was one of the hardest lessons that I've ever had to learn. And I have to admit that even today, it's an ongoing challenge for me. But as Brene Brown says, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. And I'm going to add here, even when we risk angering others. So when we start off with the questions, this is that you see here in my list, can we physically and emotionally cope? How much am I willing and able to alter my lifestyle? Can I afford to make changes? And oh, wait a minute, we've had some challenges over the years in our relationship. How do I get past that and move into this role? And what I'd like to add here is, will the other family members accept me, or even friends, accept me in the role without constant criticism? And let me give you an example of that. I was raised in a large, strict Catholic family. And I'm sure many people out there publicly, and if you're not Catholic, even so, you may have another faith. And we talk about good old Catholic guilt. It played out in me, and I was going to be a very dutiful daughter. But add to that I was also the middle child. And so I was constantly going back and forth, trying to keep everybody happy. But to be honest, in the long term, all it did was break me down, and it caused huge resentment. The ones who never came to visit, but were the first on the phone, they never offered to assist in the day-to-day, but they didn't hesitate to offer what they considered to be, I have some constructive thoughts or criticisms here, sis. Years went by and it grossly affected both my physical and my mental health. That was declining while I was caring for my father, who was in a facility 30 minutes away, still tending to my mother in her home 5 minutes away, and I had my own family. I was becoming more and more impatient with my children and my husband, and they rarely saw me smiling. And I was falling into bed late at night, and I was rising so early that I was like a walking zombie during the day. And this went on for years. So, as I'm sure you've heard this analogy when it comes to caregiving, right? It's like an emergency on an airplane. You put on your oxygen mask first, then you assist your child and the person next to you. Well, it took me decades to learn that lesson. So first it was my husband kind of putting the reins on and said, if you need to stop working to help take care of your parents, then we're going to make it work. And then if others call for an update or to offer their constructive thoughts, you know what? You can let it go to voicemail. Or you know what? You might even consider hanging up on them. But that wasn't truly in my makeup, I'll be honest. So I needed more. So I finally found my path by seeking out the right support, professional support, those who truly understood how to coach and encourage me to set limits, set those boundaries. And those guides on my path were the facilitator of a disease-specific support group and a licensed therapist who specialized in caregivers. And thank goodness that love of my life is still part of my life. I refer people that I know to her to help her encourage them. They helped me to discover the tools to set and maintain boundaries. And in doing so, also taught me the lesson that resentment was a waste of my energy and emotional well-being. But learning to set those boundaries, I'll be honest, is no easy task, and it takes ongoing work. Remember, boundaries are the lines in the sand that need to be drawn so that you can provide the care possible for your loved one while still maintaining your sanity and caring for yourself. So I'm going to start by let's addressing some of the practical aspects of it. So with so many things to take into consideration, where do you start? You've had a lot dropped on your shoulders. So you need to set priorities. These things came out of nowhere. So first you set those prioritize and you prioritize needs, then you set goals, both your own and for the person living with the disease. Now, what are the medical needs? What are the physical needs? And I'm talking about those being particularly mindful of safety in the home or in the outside environment. What are the emotional and psychological needs? The social and the familial needs, and the legal and financial. And oh, what did I do? What I'm guilty of, as we all are, I stuck wellness and self-care at the bottom, when in fact, it may be the first thing we need to consider. Now, this list on the slide is not in any particular, order of priority of need. Medical may be at the top to begin with. Legal and financial could get up there. You need to accept that this list is fluid. It can change at any time. So you have to determine on an ongoing basis what is the most significant to meet your needs. Now, you may need to sit with a trusted friend, a family member, a social worker, or even a paid professional to help you define the priorities and the necessary steps to address them. But you know what? There are some additional factors in my being able to survive these journeys and get to the point where I was able to be an informed health advocate and care coordinator. I needed to know, and this is kind of a saying, but it truly is, it's factual. I needed to know what I didn't know. I needed to educate myself on aspects of of a particular disease, all its various symptoms, the treatment, and its ongoing management. And I absolutely needed to get my act together I had numerous stacks of papers and documents all over my home, but I needed to get them organized to be prepared and ready to meet with clinicians and even attorneys and financial planners. Thus, the gifts of knowledge, education, and organization. I expanded my knowledge of what my loved one required, both emotionally and practically. And I took the time to better understand my own needs in relationship to what might be asked of me. I educated myself on a variety of topics, both medical and practical, and I took the time to gather and organize the necessary information and documents that might be required when interacting with medical professionals, first responders, and other professionals. So I'm going to start by talking about knowledge. And really, what do I mean by that? A lot of people confuse knowledge and education. And I'm going to tell you a little bit the difference between the two. It's really important to start from a place where you understand what your family member needs and what they want in their care. What values mean the most to them, and how to respect those throughout the entire process, the entire arc of their disease, and try not to overshadow them with what you believe they need. You also need to raise the question of what do they psychologically and emotionally need? What would bring them the highest quality of life on a daily basis? In my sister's case, it also entailed I didn't live with her, right? I was her sibling. So I needed to learn to respect her immediate family dynamics and determine how far I could step in as her assigned medical power of attorney. honoring her wishes for her care when some of her immediate family members completely disagreed with them. So you'll see on this slide some basic areas that I recommend you delve into. So we're going to go on to the next slide. What do I mean by know the individual, their values, and their goals? Don't I know my loved one, right? We think we do. In some relationships, that may be very, very true. But in many, it takes truly a deeper dive, to have those deeper, more intimate conversations. For example, you see my sister here, you see my sister Maureen. Now, she was an amazing medical social worker with an advanced degree in gerontology, which is the study of aging. And she went on to be the executive director of a very large nonprofit in the Redwood Empire. Her faith and her grace guided her to embrace the most vulnerable in society while still being a devoted daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother, and a beloved grandparent. Now, Lewy body became obvious to me to us in general, when she was in her early 50s. But we were determined that it wouldn't rule her world, nor define who she was or the activities that she could be involved in on a daily basis. We sat together over the course of days, weeks, months, and years, she sharing her most intimate thoughts, and me always reevaluating where we were at and where we needed to go, how we should alter the conditions around her, and providing more safety or more security and emotional security. So on this next slide, this one I am very honored to share. I'd like to introduce you to a really lovely couple, both Christine and Bob Gilmore. Christine and I met as part of a research study, and that research study was being orchestrated by Rush University in Chicago. And it was a study specific to caregiver peer mentoring. So I went through hours of training, even though I had years already, behind me, but I was specifically trained for this. And then Christine was assigned as I was the mentor, she was my mentee. And it's a wonderful program where they take someone with long-term experience and then they couple them with an individual who is new to the experience of caregiving. Now, to be honest, Christine was a natural. She made my work really easy. And she and Bob had a really incredible bond between the two of them. You need to understand that Bob Gilmore was an amazing man. He had been a highly skilled trauma surgeon, serving as the lead in battle response military medical units during his career in the armed forces. And he was paramount in some airlift operations and ongoing recovery from some veterans in the 80s and 90s. But in these photos, Bob was very well advanced in his disease. But you know what? They continued to participate in activities that Bob loved, with Christine's support and good humor. The photo where you see Bob with his thumbs up, that is just 2 months prior to his decline. He always loved collegiate basketball, and at that time it was March, and so it was March Madness. But Christine was very concerned about him being overstimulated and the noise of a crowded gym or the pushing and the shoving, and that it would really be a disaster of a day. But she decided, you know what? I'm going to get him a set of noise canceling headphones. She spoke to people in the ticket office. They got seats away from the crowd, and Bob was able to go and thoroughly enjoy himself. Her creativity and willingness to adapt to changes throughout Bob's journey allowed him to live his best life possible. So now we're going to move on to education. With my sister's care, I began by educating myself on the latest medical research and advances in clinical care on the disease, contacted the disease-specific national organization, which in my case is the Lewy Body Dementia Association, and mostly because they supported not only patients, but caregivers. I delved into the finances and benefits that were available to her, not only publicly, but those through her former employer and those of her husband's retirement accounts. And then at the first appointment at UC San Francisco, where she was being cared for, her neurologist asked if we wished to be part of their research center there. We discovered at that point, unbeknownst to me, to be honest, we discovered that not all research is drug trials, but they do longitudinal diagnostic studies, quality of life measures, caregiver supports, and so many others that we had our choice. We could pick and choose. But the best thing we learned, and I'm still involved in this process, the closer you are to the evolving science, you truly become part of a research family. So let's see here. Let's see if we can get it to change. So I just want to give you just a brief overview of the primary national organizations that provide information, referrals, and resources for those with Parkinson's. The Parkinson's Foundation, the American Parkinson's Disease Association, the Davis Phinney Foundation, and absolutely the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. Now, there are many others, but these are the ones that I, reference on a frequent basis. So we'll go on to the next, and these are the local organizations that I've worked with. And here we have what I consider the best resources in Northern California. The Parkinson Association of Northern California, who holds normally an annual conference here somewhere in the northern region. Both Stanford University and UCSF have comprehensive centers for the treatment and research into Parkinson's. And Stanford also has a large community outreach component that is free to the general public. And we in California are really fortunate to have a network of 11 caregiver resource centers under the governance of what you see here, the Family Caregiver Alliance, which is based in San Francisco. The San Francisco Bay Area group is called the Bay Area Caregiver Resource Center, and it serves the primary 6 Bay Area counties. And it's Family Caregiver Alliance, that parent, is nationally recognized for its programming. Now, down below, the little green box, the RCRC box, refers to the Redwood Caregiver Resource Center, and it covers the 7 counties beginning at the Sonoma County line, all the way north to the Oregon border, and includes Napa and Solano counties, and kind of governs, the area that I reside in. I cannot stress enough the value of the free resources that are available to us throughout our statewide networks of CRCs, as they're called. So if you haven't reached out to them yet, please do so. Now we're going to move on to getting organized. So these days, there are a whole variety of ways to, approach organizations, getting your act together. There are apps out there, and most health systems have their own patient portals where information and documents can be uploaded and downloaded. But for me, working with my sister, the reality was for us, I needed broad flexibility because she had 2 different insurances covering multiple healthcare settings. We interacted with both Kaiser Permanente and then through her Blue Cross plan, UCSF, and others. So to maintain all of that information and documents across multiple platforms, I went the old-fashioned paper route. You see, it wasn't just about me having the documents and contending with them. I didn't reside with her, and I lived 30 minutes away from her. So I needed to keep her other healthcare agents, along with the paid caregivers in the home and her immediate family, informed with consistent, up-to-date information, while still being sensitive to those that weren't they were technologically challenged. They weren't comfortable necessarily on a computer, or if they had a computer, they didn't have a smartphone. So I made multiple copies of literally a red binder. We called it the emergency binder, and it contained all you see here on this slide. Each time there was an update, I amended my original document, made those necessary edits, and then I emailed a new copy to each one of them. There were 5 copies so that they could update their own. Now, I kept a binder for ease of access. One was in my car, One other one was in my home. So they were always within reach. If I had to field a phone call from a caregiver or from a physician, they were there. And at that time, I found it worked better than having a cloud or a portal version at that moment, because if we needed to go to the emergency room, I discovered that due to the telemetry monitoring that goes on in those rooms, many emergency rooms block Wi-Fi. So if you have a smartphone with you with documents on the cloud, you may not be able to access them. So I would check with your local facilities, in advance. At medical appointments, it was easy. I had that binder. If the doctor needed something, I could whip out a page and say, here, take a copy. So, and what made it easy, I'm going to draw, for a moment, to my final point here. Legal documents. I really think it's essential that I mention this, because I know a lot of people tend to put them off, not wanting to contend with these items. Those can include your medical powers of attorney, your advanced healthcare directives, the authorizations for release of medical information known as the HIPAA releases, and the physician's order for life-sustaining treatment, also known in California as the POLST form. I highly recommend that every family out there not delay that discussion about advanced care and financial planning. And that all falls under these legal documents category. I know that you all may, a lot of people have, kind of their hesitancy to discuss, the whole issue of long-term care and end of life care. But, I firmly believe that everybody, once they turn the age of 18, needs to start having these early discussions. I feel it's an absolute necessity, especially in our HIPAA governed healthcare. Now, and if it's not done earlier on, then at least once a significant diagnosis is made. I understand that many individuals are really resistant. I do. But it can, and there's a variety of reasons for that, right? It can be a cultural stigma against discussing end of life. Others seem to not want to choose between one family member or another. They're worried about someone's feelings being hurt. But, and then there's others that just kind of tell you, oh, geez, I haven't gotten around to it yet. But speak with your family, have those discussions. In the US, I don't know if everybody's here from California. There may be others in other jurisdictions, but you need to also check the local laws governing these documents, because they do change even within healthcare systems. Let's say those HIPAA releases. Kaiser Permanente has their own. Stanford may have their own, or you may be able to bring in another document. I'm not certain. So you need to double check with people. And when you bring your loved one to the table, remember and tell them, don't worry, these documents are not set in stone. They can be changed. Alterations can be made as status changes, as long as the individual continues to have decision-making capacity. Now, if you don't feel comfortable raising this issue with your loved one or the, extended family that you want to include in the discussion, talk to the doctor, talk to the primary care physician. Let them be the fall guy. Let them bring up the topic, and you also have the option to ask possibly a social worker or a specialty nurse to facilitate a family meeting if you don't feel comfortable chairing one. So now we're going to talk about a new role, your new role, and I call it becoming a health advocate. So advocacy, you can read through this. It takes on a variety of roles, but my sister used to term me her health advocate because she didn't like the term necessarily caregiver. We could say care partner, but it always made her feel that, I was there, our role was that I was hovering over her to care for her, when in fact, ours was a true partnership in this. So I kind of consider advocacy the gift that keeps on giving and allows you to pay it forward. And it's several years ago, and this goes back maybe just even a decade or, 20 years ago, you never heard the term health advocate when it came to being the primary caregiver of someone with a chronic or terminal disease. In fact, many caregivers felt like when you went to a medical appointment between your loved one and their physician, you were the invisible person in the room. You were just expected to sit in the side chair and not open your mouth. I know that's how my mother viewed my role. The doctor and the patient were primaries. But you know what? As the years have gone by, the role of the primary carer has been elevated to the point where in most healthcare settings, you're a vital member of the healthcare team. And I know that kind of growing into that role for me gave me the courage that when that I didn't, that when the healthcare providers or the systems weren't meeting my loved ones' needs, I could I could step forward and advocate on their behalf and make certain that things changed. And as my sister referred to me, and she did it in a public meeting, but it was also the first day she formally recognized publicly that she had Lewy body disease. She called me her pit bull. Now, mind you, I am always polite and I'm collaborative, but I am tenacious when I am seeking out what will bring my loved one the highest quality of life possible throughout the course of their illness. And I want you to remember that we are their voices when they lose theirs. So now I'm going to change tracks. And I want to talk about the need for each of us to create these connections. What I kind of termed, I built a village of care, not only around my sister, but for myself too, right? The concept wasn't even in my wheelhouse. It was not part of my toolkit when I was caring for my parents. The best we could muster, we had friends who were just lovely and they were there for us. Don't get me wrong. But back then it was, well, they bring meals and they provide transportation. But, a few family members that came for occasional visits. But when my sister became ill, I knew that I absolutely had to do it differently. So I developed a multidisciplinary team comprised of professionals and others who brought their area of expertise, and we integrated her care and support. It, it not only impacted her health, but my well-being as well, because I lightened my load. So we as caregivers are called upon to wear so many hats, just like I showed you in the beginning, and in areas that we have no experience or particular skill set in. So by seeking that expertise and support of the professionals and others, we lighten our load and remove those boulders off our shoulders. Now, on the medical side, see what your healthcare system may offer. And I'm referring to like the supportive care services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. They may even provide a social worker. They may offer support groups. They may have guidance on where to seek out respite care. Now, on the legal side, check, you see that I have attorney, financial planner, even your insurance agent to talk about benefits and other coverages. But you know what? There are also local resources. Here you may have, we talked about the CRCs, those local caregiver resource centers may be able to assist, your area agency on agings, in Sonoma County, the Council on Aging. And you may need to see what they offer in these areas. But you know what? Now we're going to change tracks. We are going to put on our oxygen masks and talk about self-care and other things. So I'm opening this section with this amazing painting. It's by one of my caregivers that I've supported over the last several years. Her name is Nancy Haig, and Nancy obviously is an incredibly gifted artist, but she refers to painting as her life-saving. It is a lifesaver for me. It's not only her self-care, but she also considers it her spiritual practice. Now, I want to steer you towards this. Now, you all obviously know about exercise and its importance, but I've always been a lifelong exerciser. I participate in a lot of things from the time I was a young child till today. But with my sister, she was an executive. So she tended to be a little bit more sedentary in what she was doing. But initially, when we stepped into, our meetings with her clinician at UCSF, her neurologist there, the best thing he told me I could do for her was to keep her socially and physically engaged. So the first thing I did is I happened to notice that Stanford was offering a symposium um, that really it was life changing. So I signed us up to attend it, and it ended up changing our mindsets, our goals. And what was funny is it brought us inordinate joy and laughter for several years. And it was entitled Exercise and the Brain. Now, the symposium featured this very handsome gentleman up here in the corner. He's a world-class road bicyclist by the name of Davis Finney. And he, along with research scientists, talked about what we call the magic pill, one that was free to all, making no money for any pharmaceutical company. And that was exercise. So first, right, we listened to all the researchers, and they obviously described both the physiological and evidence-based benefits of exercise. But who completely hooked us in was Davis Finney. When he took that dice, his body, like maybe many of you, right, it was bobbing, it was weaving back and forth. His arms were jerking. And it was all because he was suffering from dyskinesias from the effects of his Parkinson's meds, those side effects of long-term use. Now, Davis had been diagnosed with Parkinson's at the young onset age of 40. And the result that burdened him for the next few years was a very severe depression. Now, he was a professional athlete who had won 328 bicycling races, more than any other American to that date and still to this day in his professional career. He felt his world had literally fallen apart. It was crumbling around him. And so it was a few years in, and this chronic response to his depression, that his physician finally told him essentially, Davis, knock it off. Quit feeling sorry for yourself, get back to your trainer, and start working out again. So he finally took his physician's advice and he began working out. And you know what he did? The next thing he did was to drop down in that guise, and he started doing push-ups, just like this photo. That's not Davis, that's a graphic, but just like that photo here that you see in front of you. Then that was impressive, mind you. But in the next graphic, he got up on this, literally, it wasn't a balance board, but it was a half moon. And he literally started balancing back and forth and swaying. And at that moment, we absolutely were hooked in. He went on to say that he didn't care whether you were early in your disease process or you were in advanced stages of any disease. You might even be wheelchair or bedbound. If you are able, get moving. If you can't move your own muscles and limbs, have someone do it for you. Each time you move, you spark your brain and it opens up those neuronal pathways, firing your brain cells, firing your neurons. And that was all the inspiration we needed to get moving. So we got moving. So you'll see in the upper left corner of my slide, a group water aerobics class, and that's my health club, the Airport Health Club in Santa Rosa. I approached them to see if my sister could be under my membership as my dependent. And thank goodness they agreed. We were in the pool together for 4 years, 3 days a week. And her neighbors would drive her in from out in West County to join us. Now, mind you, over that period of time, yes, we had to check in with her physical therapist. We had to ask questions to keep her continually safe in the pool. However, we adapted and we continued to do it for as long as she could. We walked together over the course of years. And we also, through her physical therapist, she learned how to use trekking poles, like the ones you see hikers use. They helped her not only to maintain her balance, but also to retain her arm swing that is lost. That juxtaposed arm swing in your gait. People with Parkinson's tend to lose that arm swing, but it again is motion. It is using those brain cells. And you see Bob in the lower left. Besides going to his health club, he used a portable exercise wheel, which could be used either for upper or lower body workouts. Some people also use recumbent bikes. If you or your loved one have concerns about health issues or mobility limitations, speak with the primary care physician and maybe even work with a physical therapist to start things off. Now, we're going to slow our pace down a little bit. We're going to talk about self-care. Now, this slide and the next slide, I did garner from UCSF's website, and it refers to oncology, right? But however, that makes no difference here. Self-care can be similar across any disease spectrum. So I want you, as I just kind of go through this, I'm not going to read these slides. I just want you to kind of review it. And you'll see it provides numerous, really easy in most cases, easy to integrate practices. And I tell you from my experience, we all desperately need self-care. I miserably failed when I was involved with both of my parents' care. And by the time they passed away, I needed to physically and emotionally recover for a very long time. But when I finally got on board with my sister, both of us had an improved quality of life and better health outcomes. So I go on to the next one that you can look at. We attended those water aerobics classes together, which not only helped to maintain her range of motion and mobility, but created around her a really supportive and encouraging community of friends. And I bet you have the same with PD Connect. I started to see, and this was one of the many gifts I gave myself, a caregiver counselor, and continue to do so all the way through her passing and beyond. Over those years, she helped me to set my limits and recognize when I was overdoing it. And the fun thing that I did for myself, and this was a real indulgence, is I started getting facials, right? Oh, and what I did is I learned some facial techniques. So my sister, who was a woman who never even wore, moisturizer, who never took care of herself, because she was always on the go, I'd say, okay, sis, it's time. I'm going to give you a facial. And so I got to have the time, that intimate time with her and pamper her. And I'll tell you, not only did I just enjoy the act of doing that, but the memories that these self-care practices, they remind me of the times that when I saw her joy, her smile, and she had a beautiful smile, and her laughter. And these are some of the biggest treasures I carry with me even now. But I've got a few more things to share with you. I want to talk just for a moment about spirituality. Now, I recognize that spirituality is kind of, some people aren't comfortable with the term. It's a very personal term, and it means different things to different people. For us, we came from a religious upbringing. So it certainly, it included a church, the structure, and it included prayer. But it can mean so much more. It doesn't have to mean those things. I love to be in nature. I love to hike. I love to wake up and I love to listen to the birds in my backyard in the quiet of the morning. I have a breakfast room that is 3 sides glass. So, I look out there. Sometimes I have my neighbor's cats in the yard, but, the interaction of nature just outside. And on occasion, there's this little white butterfly that I'll occasionally see flit through. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, but I associate it with my sister coming for a visit. You saw that beautiful swallowtail butterfly that Nancy painted. She either takes a book or she takes her easel for painting, and she sits in one of our regional parks, just soaking up the sun and nature. And I'll be honest, for those who struggle with having any sense of spirituality, no matter what it is, I truly sense that they have this burden that they carry, this real heaviness on them when it comes to dealing with all the caregiving that they're doing. So I really recommend that you find your space, your practice, and exercise it as frequently as you can. It will end up being one of the most useful tools in your caregiving toolbox and truly a gift to yourself. So I'm going to move on to this lovely young woman. Her name is Omatola Thomas, and she is actually a native Nigerian, and she happens to live in London with her husband and family. But she is also an engineer, and she was, going on with her career when she was diagnosed at young set Parkinson's disease at the age of 35. But Omatola didn't sit still with it. She decided to formulate the organization Parkinson's Africa, the first of its kind in the entire nation. She is caring for that entire nation with her grit and passion. And this is her quote, she practices gratitude each day, and her quote is applicable to each of us. I have come to understand that there will be different hues on the canvas of my life story. Some will be bright and they'll be colorful, others dark and gloomy. The darker hues will certainly be more challenging to paint, but when they're applied properly with the right perspective, they will add contrast and so much value, wisdom, experience, empathy, the value to the final painting. So I want to move on to what I consider, let's talk about what really matters. And to me, quality of life each step of the way is it. You know, it may be a simple smile. It could be laughter. It could be engaging with friends, being out in nature. It could be traveling. The crazy part is my sister and I would travel when we had research studies. You see us in Seattle being with a friend. You see us up at Lionsgate, up in Vancouver, British Columbia. We went to research and then we traveled. We took another 10 days just to enjoy leisure time. So what this slide represents to me is I want each of you to remember a medical diagnosis does not define who you are or what you are. This is just a new chapter in your life, and you need to write that story. But I want you to indulge me for a few more moments because I'd like to share my favorite section. I want you to listen to the voices of a few other caregivers. And I deliberately called this section Discovery and Creativity because it takes discovering kind of the gaps and the weaknesses along this path, and then kind of invoking some creativity to find solutions. So I'm just going to check the time here. Oh my goodness, I'm going a little longer than I expected, but we'll get through this in just a moment and hopefully have time for Q&A. So I want you to listen to Greg here. Learning empathy begins with understanding. Even though I had known him as an acquaintance for 6 years prior to his diagnosis, I really hadn't experienced his vulnerability as a man. During the last 2 years, I've learned to dance with him. How much do I help him? How long should I wait to step in as I see his frustrations rise? He has taught me that empathy begins with the ability to ask a simple question. How can I help you? Rather than assuming I know what his needs are and asserting my will to help him. With Bill, I'll give you a synopsis. Bill discovered many things: the gift of obtaining an accurate diagnosis, the benefits of a support group in gaining additional knowledge and maintaining his mental health. Thinking knowledge is power, and learning new strategies to respond to situations with his wife, and then journaling things to document them for the clinician. We move on to Vicky. Vicky speaks to gifts of separating the person from the disease. Now, they had some challenges in their relationships over the years, but you know what? Vicky had moments of clarity and forgiveness. She learned to understand the symptoms of the disease. And although they'd had those challenges, the gifts she discovered allowed her to be the best version of herself in her husband's final years. And that provided her consolation and comfort in her grief after he had passed. Pam's is simple: let go, focus on what is working versus not working, slow down, be present, listen, engage, connect, coach. And these lessons continue to benefit her today. Now, this slide, I love this verse from Valley. It's one she shared with me just a few weeks ago. Listen to his intuition. Be guided by his pace, not mine. Give him time to gather his thoughts and to articulate them, time to connect with his feelings and to express them, time to tell his stories and to reminisce in them, time to sing his songs and to take pride in them, time to inhale precious moments and to have joy exhaling them, time to walk his own steps and to find peace in them. Now, to all you care partners and those living with Parkinson's out there, I want to thank you for spending a portion of your day with me. I hope that I've provided you with some gifts to use and treasure throughout your journey. And I want to add one last thought, because this I listened to last night as I was watching the last episode of Ted Lasso. And Leslie Higgins, the team manager or the corporate manager, said, the best we can do is to keep asking for help and accepting it when you can. And I'm going to turn this around because I can't remember it here. And if you do, you'll always be moving forwards better. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to stop the share. And oh my goodness, I've taken up a lot of your time here. So Lisa, I'm going to let you take it.
Thank you so much, Helen. What a very pertinent and practical presentation, obviously with a lot of passion as well. We'd like to take the opportunity to open it up to questions. If anybody has questions, do you have time for questions, Helen?
I have as much time as they do. Absolutely.
Any questions from anyone? I did want to mention, thank you so much, Helen. Lisa already thanked you, but we do have quite a mixture of people that will be, that are here with us today, but also people who will be watching this video. And it's so important. We teach exercise and education for people with Parkinson's disease.
Hold on,
and we just started a new caregiver support group, or care partner support group, as we call it. It's so great to hear your perspective. And it's probably really great for people with Parkinson's to hear your perspective as well, because then they can, it probably resonates with them and their care partner or their caregiver. And it might be nice to take a step back and really consider, self-care for their care partner.
Absolutely. It's both sides, and I was able, certainly there are still practices that I took on for myself, but in the same light, it started from a basis of my sister and I doing it together.
Absolutely.
And we shared, and it absolutely improved our relationship. And it became a very, very intimate and loving relationship. And I consider it one of the best gifts of my life, to have that closeness as sisters, but not just that, but as friends.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions here? Oh, here we go. We've got one in the chat here. How often do you recommend we revise the legal documents? We took care of all of that immediately after diagnosis, but that was about 10 years ago.
Okay. I'll be frank. 10 years ago is too late. Even in my world, now my documents, my own personal, were over 10 years old. Law may change is the first thing. You need to check in with whoever originally drafted those documents. I recommend, if you do not have a family attorney, that you get one. A lot of people go to what we term trust mills to get these documents taken care of. And once you're involved with, let's say, a long-term illness, there may be very specific financial needs. You may need to be looking towards qualifying for Medi-Cal or Medicaid later on. And so those are very specific things that you need to prepare and be included in your legal documents. So I advise every 3 to 4 years, or if there is a major change, and then verify with your financial planner that appropriate beneficiary documents are covered, powers of attorney are assigned, even for those things. Check with your banker. What might they recommend? There can be a lot to it, but once you get the primary done, then revisit, check with them and say, has laws changed? Or you express to them that your life's journey has changed. They may say, oh yeah, it's time to come in. And absolutely, I would say every 3 to 4 years, just do a check-in.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? No. Oh, yes.
Somebody has just asked, are you familiar with the 5 wishes? I am. That is an amazing conversation starter. And if any of you are dementia caregivers out there, what came into my radar a couple of years ago is what is deemed the dementia living will. We think of our advanced healthcare directives and advanced directives as a living will. That's another term for it, but there is also a dementia living will. So that actually asks a few more questions, and that allows your loved one to have more voice, more detailed voice as to what they wish along the journey too. So, but 5 wishes is a very good document to start from. Yeah, and they have an amazing website to boot. So
excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for spending all of your time with us. This is wonderful. If anyone else has any other questions, you can always send them to us and we can forward them to Helen and we'll get back to you. And I just wanted to tell you, if you don't know who we are, most of you know, but I'm Steph and that's Lisa, and together we're PD Connect. We teach exercise and education for people with Parkinson's, but we also have speaker series like today and support groups for people with Parkinson's and care partners. So check us out at our website, and which is pd-connect.org. We've got something in the chat that said, thank you, Helen. Very valuable information. And
really pertinent.
Yes, and peace. Yes, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you for the inspiring talk. Thank you to all of you, it says. Oh, that was you. that was pretty fast. Well done. And someone else said best yet. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you.